Hello and welcome to today's ICMI webinar. We're very glad you've joined us for Promise and Reality, Artificial Intelligence in the Contact Center. I'm Tim McElgan. I'm the editorial manager and principal analyst at ICMI, and I'll be your host for today's session. A few housekeeping announcements before we get started. If you have any technical difficulties during today's session, just hit F5 or Command-R, depending on your platform, to refresh your browser window. If you need further assistance, just click on the yellow help icon below the slides, and somebody will get to you and get you sorted out real quick. We do encourage you to go ahead and ask questions at any time during the discussion. To do that, just type your questions into the Q&A window on the side of your screen and hit the submit button. We may run out of time, and if we're not able to answer your questions today, I will try to capture all those and we'll get back to you offline as soon as possible after the session. If there are any additional resources, they'll be found in the resource list. I don't know, guys, did we send any resource over? I don't think we did. But if there are any, they'll be under the resource list widget located in your console. And finally, today's presentation will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live event. You'll receive an email reminder once that becomes available. And with that, let's go ahead and meet today's panelists. We'll start with Dr. Lorian Pratt. Lorian has a unique perspective on AI. She's been deeply involved in its development and application of AI since the early 80s, when she earned the first of 3 computer science degrees, 2 of which include an AI specialty. I've known Lorian for about 20 years, since we were analysts together at Stratocast Partners. What I didn't know then was that she was a top machine learning expert. She invented an important discipline within machine learning called transfer learning. She's gone on to tackle what's arguably one of the hardest problems in the field, which is how to bridge machine learning to solve not just complex business problems, but also some of the hardest problems of our time, like how society can effectively address issues like COVID-19, equity, and armed conflict. In the meantime, Lori has also invented another sub-discipline within machine learning called decision intelligence and founded Quantellia. And today, organizations across the world are working with Lorian and Quantellia to bridge machine learning, to ROI. Welcome, Lorian. Next, Ben O'Loughlin. Ben is head of growth at Servicely AI. After a short stint as a CIO and then a robotics engineer, Ben started his own first IT company in 2001. 20 years and many business successes later, he joined Servicely as head of sales and marketing and as an investor and board director. Ben believes we succeed only through service to others. He has bachelor's degrees in science, maths, as they say in Australia, systems engineering with first-class honors and the University Medal, and music, both jazz performance and double bass. And on most Wednesday nights, if you happen to be in Canberra, Australia, you can find him running a jazz jam right at the old Canberra Inn. And I know that Roy and I are both looking forward to sitting in on that one day. Of course, I'll be immediately shouted off the stage. Roy Atkinson is CEO of Business Advisory Practice. I'm having trouble with my words today, folks. I apologize. Roy is CEO of Business Advisory Practice, Clifton Butterfield, LLC. He was described on CIO Insight as a model for the future of digital leader, and by Nextiva as one of the top 50 customer service experts of the decade 2010 through 2020. He has written for The Economist, BizTech Magazine, Oracle Customer Experience, SAP Business Innovation, and others. He's a fellow of the Institute for Digital Transformation, and he holds a master's certificate in Advanced Management Strategy from Tulane's University Freeman School of Business. Roy acts like a normal guy, but the ICMI community knows he is a contact center superhero. Welcome, Lorian, Ben, and Roy. Let's go ahead and set the stage for today's conversation. Let's get your views on the state of AI generally and in the contact center. Roy, I'm going to start with you, followed by Ben, and then Lorian. So Roy, at a 10,000-foot level, where do we stand in application of what is broadly termed artificial intelligence in terms of the challenges and priorities of the modern contact center?
Thanks, Tim. Well, for all the progress that's been made, and the progress has been enormous, and it's being made daily, we're still in AI's infancy. And that means that we're only beginning to sort out the relationship between the technology and the humans who use it, which is really where the rubber hits the road, right? That's what I call the second hybrid, the first being in office and work from anywhere. Hybrid human and AI teams have only begun to emerge, and the where and how to apply AI and machine learning to tasks and priorities of the contact center are going to continue to be an area of exploration. Organizations are applying these technologies to the easy stuff, but now we're exploring other areas where AI can improve both internal operations and relationships with customers. So it's expanding daily.
Great. Thank you for that, Roy. Ben, as a solution provider, you help service desk customers primarily deal with very similar issues. Where do you think contact centers do you think contact centers need to understand about their own organizations before or as they start making plans for AI?
Yeah, I concur with Roy in that some of the easier use cases have been explored and exploited. So it's a matter of surveying the marketplace and understanding how those capabilities fit your problem space and being clear about what it is that you're trying to achieve in your context. The second thing I think I'd say is that, you know, I had a little bit of a background in ML, support vector machines type stuff about 15 years ago. And since then, you know, AI has, you know, done some incredible things. And I think the challenge for today's solution providers is to get those use cases where good data is available and the capabilities of AI are matched to the requirements for accuracy of solution in the contact center, because in some cases it has to be extremely accurate. In other cases, you know, you're talking about augmenting a human who may only have 90 to 95% accuracy anyway. So it's understanding, you know, what AI is good at and where it can be applied.
Great, thank you for that. Lorian, we're going to dive much more deeply on this during the conversation today, but what are a few of the many questions that contact center decision makers need to start asking as they evaluate implementing AI solutions? You know, I think the question really comes down to how can they separate AI hype from the current AI reality?
Well, I think the first thing to say is there's a tremendous amount of AI hype. When we come up with new technologies, we don't always have a Hollywood industry that's adding a whole bunch of fuzziness and cloudiness and clickbait to the story. So AI is particularly hard to sort the wheat from the chaff. So the very high level comment I would make is you really need to be asking tough questions. There's lots of reasons for people saying their technology is great, despite it actually being great. So how do you assess whether technology is great? Ask the vendor, if you're buying from a vendor, how do you measure the accuracy of your AI solutions? How do you know it's doing its job? And then once they tell you how they measure whether it's doing its job, ask them how it scores according to that measure, 98%, 29%, whatever metric they used. And often you'll hear an internal metric like 29%, you know, true positives plus true negatives. Then you need to convert that internal measure, that 29%, to the external measure. What's the expected return on investment of this AI solution? If you take all of my costs and all of my potential revenue, some cases, a 12% performing AI solution can be fantastic. And this goes to what Ben said, that sometimes our human experts are maybe 5% correct, and so 12 is great. Sometimes we have to get all the way up to 98%, according to whatever metric they use, in order for there to be value. So be sure that you ask these tough questions. I think the final thing I'll say is a lot of times we tend to be sort of bedazzled by the technology, and we lose track of, you know, what are we comparing it to? What is the process that's being done today? How would you measure its accuracy along the same lines as the AI system? And how would our AI system compare? Sometimes we sort of fall for the myth that something automated or AI is sexy and good by definition, when it actually is not good as the existing human system, or perhaps as Roy was talking about, a human-computer hybrid is often the best solution.
Yeah, I know we've talked about, and folks, you can find a discussion of this on LorianPratt.com, on her blog. But we've talked about the situation in early AI where a company in India thought they should bring in AI, and it turned out that they were perfectly happy with the 80 or 90% accuracy that they were getting from human beings. So this hugely expensive AI solution turned out to be nonsensical for that application. And I'm going to go back to you, Lorian. we've discussed many times, the unfortunate reality is that organizations who are embarking on AI implementations for the first time make a bunch of the same mistakes that other organizations have made before them. What are some of the errors in AI planning or implementation that contact center pros in our audience need to look out for and avoid, hopefully?
When you're first talking to your vendor, don't allow yourself to be bamboozled. Don't let their favorite PhD be brought to the meeting and they go down this path of talking about all the fancy words and you have no clue whatsoever. Time out on them. Tell them you don't want to see under the hood unless you know how fast the car drives and how comfortable the driver's seat is. Don't let people just sell to you by, impressing you with big words as opposed to speaking with clarity. Hold your vendors accountable for clearly explaining what they're doing. And if you're thinking of developing something internally or you've got a data team internally, don't hire a PhD that impresses you with their credentials. Hire someone who can speak clearly. And along times, we do have sort of this hybrid between the external vendor and the internal team. And often the demarcation between those two is the internal team's job is to gather and collect the data that you have in your organization. I think one of the biggest AI planning mistakes we make is we underestimate the cost of gathering that data. And we don't realize that, it's kind of a data janitorial job. Nobody likes to talk about it, but almost every AI project I've seen vastly underestimates, if they do have to have their own internal data, just the cost of gathering that data in the first place when you're first building the AI system. But even more importantly, keeping that data up to date and then using that to update the AI system over the. I think the last comment I would make is, think carefully, a house team or a vendor team or some kind of hybrid, and realize all three options are viable depending on your circumstance.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, data hygiene probably never more important than with AI. Roy, you work daily with contact center organizations who are thinking about or perhaps have already started down the road of implementing AI in the contact center. What are some of the top issues they're looking to solve with the technology, and are they picking the right targets today?
That's such a great question. And before I answer it directly, I'd just like to say, and I think this follows on to what Lorian was just saying, I do worry about phrases that I hear all the time, one of which is AI initiatives. It's a bit, to use an analogy that I often use, it's a bit like a mechanic walking out in the garage with a 10-millimeter wrench saying, okay, what do I fix now? Define the problem first. That's the key. What are you trying to solve? And where do we need help is another question to start from. How can we close the gaps in our ability to provide better experiences for employees and for customers? Those are key questions that you have to start with. And here in 2022, analyst Maribel Lopez one day tweeted that if you think you can simply go hire the people you need, you're mistaken. So that's the kind of gap that you should be looking for. Where can we apply this technology to close a gap that is very difficult for us to close otherwise? But picking the right target starts with that gap analysis. Where are we missing the power to get things done? Which of those things can AI assist with? And quick examples are, and we had some pre-webinar discussion about this, coaching agents, and there are several systems that do a pretty good job of that. And any manager will tell you there just isn't enough time for them to do it properly. Data analytics, especially with regard to the huge amounts of dark data that sits in the contact center, tons of unanalyzed phone calls. Of course, people listen to the ones that you're trying to do QA on, but other dark data just sits there and is never looked at. So trying to get a handle on some of that is very handy. And I think I'll probably come back to that a little bit later on. Applications for conversational AI, which is rapidly improving, are huge opportunities as well was familiar with one company that has a test currently going on where they actually have a number you can call, and the AI will apply for a job with you. It will try to convince you to hire it. And it's pretty impressive. So conversational AI is really coming along as well. And it's one of the areas where there's a lot of progress and a lot of promise for contact centers.
Great. Thank you for that, Roy. I once again started talking before I unmuted. I'm kind of known for that. It's my trademark. Ben, same question for you. What are some of the misconceptions? Now, I know you're working on the service desk side primarily rather than contact center at this point, but we all know that there's a lot of overlap between the processes, procedures, et cetera, between those two types of organizations. What are some of the misconceptions about AI capabilities that you're hearing from service desk decision makers and implementation teams, and that our audience might need to watch out for as well?
Well, I think to pick up on what Lorian was saying before, there's a bit of a hype cycle effect going on. And if a vendor isn't saying they're a next generation AI platform, then they need to fire their marketing team, because that's kind of sort of table stakes from an information warfare point of view. What does that mean for someone who's in the market to try and improve their processes and their outcomes? Well, I think, to echo Roy a minute ago, starting with what problem are you trying to solve, and how might you translate that into business requirements along with the metrics that you're trying to move the needle on, is the first step. And then I think actually just going out and talking to vendors and saying, well, look, here's the problem, in a sort of a collaborative way. Here's the problem we're trying to solve. Sidebar, it's hard to keep track of the way that different vendors are approaching the problem and what the capabilities they have, and you can't really tell from their marketing hype. So then going down to the level of, okay, if I have these business requirements, in your software, how would I translate that into functional requirements? What's your tool going to do for me? And how's that going to address, my problem space, and what sort of difference is that going to make to the outcomes that I'm going to get? Again, external metrics, as Lorian said. So when you put that together, you need a clear set of business, goals, I guess, and then from that, a set of metrics and business requirements. Then talk to the vendors and find out different ways of approaching the problem and decide for yourself which of those are going to be important. And then you need to, see where the rubber hits the road and see what solutions can actually deliver against those requirements, and what's the kind of price performance equation for those different solutions, and then based on that, get a realistic understanding of how is this going to move the needle, and what is that worth to me, and how efficient is it going to be as a way of achieving my goals.
Yeah, great. Ben, so let's just stick with you for a second. In our conversations, most recently in the food court of the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, which was a little noisy, but we got through it, as well as some of the research that you've done yourself and shared with me, knowledge management comes up as a huge issue for service desks, and that's certainly also the case in contact centers. Turnover is high. Tribal knowledge can be lost every time an experienced agent leaves the company. What role potentially could AI play in helping organizations understand what knowledge these less experienced agents need, and how to best capture and share that knowledge?
Yeah, well, I think at a high level, it's kind of waterfall versus agile. The traditional way of arming contact center agents with knowledge is that they go through a classroom training, and they get stuffed full of all of the knowledge and all the use cases and all of the scripts and everything, and then they're released into the wild. And I went to a presentation that said something like 95% of information is not retained after 2 weeks. The exact statistic wasn't retained in my case, so I'm going to make up 95%. But I think in that situation, that's the waterfall type approach. The more agile approach is to let AI understand the context for a particular call, a particular case, and then retrieve contextually appropriate knowledge to arm that service agent so they can then apply their, perhaps higher level heuristic to which piece of knowledge is actually targeted at this particular problem. And then that piece of knowledge, it may be a user-facing piece of knowledge so that you forward to them. It may be a piece of context around it, like, oh, there's a product recall with this particular model that they're talking about, or it could be like a playbook for the agent. It's like, okay, well, if you've got the blue one or the black one, and if you've got the black one, what's the serial number, and has it got a little wingding on the side, and a bit of a sort of a scripted approach to triage. And those are all different types of knowledge that can be surfaced. Of course, it relies on you having that sort of knowledge available. And so, applying an 80-20 approach to that, is you can't do everything with AI. You still have to analyze the sorts of problems that are coming up and the sorts of knowledge articles, and hopefully you can reuse some of your training materials for that. But having a knowledge base behind you is, a precondition to, it sounds obvious, but it's a precondition to getting that value out of the AI for the knowledge use cases. And it's something that you need to kind of factor into your plans.
Great. Lorian, turning to you, based on your experience, do you see knowledge management as an area where AI can be a extremely useful tool? Are there particular flavors of AI, perhaps DI, that would be a more natural fit for those kinds of applications?
Yeah, it's funny, Tim. Up until now, we've seen quite a separation between traditional, like supervised learning AI on the one hand, and then NLP on the other, and then decision intelligence on the third. I think, the way you might characterize what's been going on in AI for the past decade or decade and a half is we've been moving from human knowledge as the basis for AI to data as the basis for AI. And these days, nobody really would ever start an AI project without having data, right? So we can't do AI without data. Your listeners might be surprised to learn that in the 80s, nobody used data. We couldn't start an AI project without human knowledge. And the whole idea of AI was to elicit this human knowledge that Ben was just talking about, and to have formal methodologies for doing that. So, where do we come to today? Let's get past our data fetish, right? It turns out a lot of things we do, including in the contact center, need both. That we have lots of data about our users, whether it's dark data, as we were talking about before, or it's, semantic analysis of dark or undark data. But we also have a tremendous amount of human knowledge. And so my advice to your listeners would be to take a look at decision intelligence, because what it's trying to do is to bring these two lost pieces of AI back together, is to say, look, most tough problems, we need both. We need some data that we have. Why not use it if we have historical data? But data is notoriously broken and noisy, especially in production environments. And so let's also take advantage of human knowledge, both when we're building our AI system, but also as we're using it, right? So we're not just automatically, sending somebody to a particular call queue, but as we were just talking about, you have an agent in the middle working hand in hand with some advice from the AI. And so to me, that's the perfect mix, is to bring in the human knowledge in advance and then in the real time, and then also to have a way of combining the data. And decision intelligence, if you look into it, is a good methodology for getting that knowledge out of people's heads and into some systems.
And that's a pretty good description of knowledge management, right? So, Roy, I know knowledge management is an area that you speak and write and think about constantly. From your experience, is that potentially a low-hanging fruit for contact centers, or is that really knowledge management really a good early target for organizations that already have relatively mature knowledge management in place?
I think there's two sides to it. Organizations that have mature knowledge management are at an advantage here because organized knowledge can contribute to the training and feeding of AI, as Lorian was just saying. And that's why many of us have been emphasizing the importance of knowledge management and data management for the past several years. When we talk about AI, we can't exclude those things. Knowledge and data are absolutely required to make this stuff work. Other organizations that don't have that kind of mature knowledge management can get to work right now. Don't wait. Right, best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. Second best time is now. Get to work now and get that knowledge organized and in a form where it's consumable internally, externally. There are some really good ways to do that. I happen to be a strong proponent of the KCS methodology, which research continually shows stands above and beyond other ones for getting this done and keeping it fresh and making sure that we're using the proper stuff. Reuse is what bubbles things to the top in KCS, and those are the types of things that you want to have ready for a system to be able to do things in a more automated way, whether it's providing through a chatbot, an AI-driven chatbot or something like that to customers. Get that stuff done. On the flip side of it, contextualizing knowledge, making it directly relevant to what people are trying to accomplish, can also be AI assisted, and I'm aware of a lot of efforts in that regard by solution providers who are trying to make it very specific and available by the context of what you're trying to do. Let's say you're in Excel. And you're trying to figure out what formula you need to do a particular thing. There's a knowledge management button you can click. It will assist you and feed you the relevant articles on creating formulas in Excel, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't tell you the history of Excel. It doesn't tell you how to get Excel. Just specifically focuses on what you're trying to accomplish. And that takes an awful lot of effort off customers' shoulders and off agents' shoulders when they're trying to get at the knowledge that they need and keep it relevant.
Great. And I'm just going to, for those in the audience who may not be familiar with all of the acronyms and whatnot, we'll use KCS is Knowledge-Centered Service, and it's a huge area of focus for both service center, service desks, and contact centers today. This kind of leads nicely into the next question I have, Roy. Training, another area, or certainly a primary area that has impact on how engaged and productive contact center workers are, how long they stick around, et cetera. Well, you can't spell training without AI, I guess, but can you give us some examples of how AI might be used to improve training strategies and some of the benefits that can bring?
As we've learned over the past couple of years, especially in light of hybrid, remote, and in-office working, training is often best delivered in small, relevant bursts. Right? The 3-day training that people used to go to maybe doesn't work so well anymore. It doesn't fit with the schedules they have. It doesn't fit with their locations as well. And so, as I said about knowledge management, if you can contextualize the learning, make it directly relevant to what agents need to know here and now, and make it more like coaching than training, then it can relieve supervisors and managers from some of the tasks of scheduling and tracking the training that's being delivered, which is not an easy task. Having done it, I can testify to that. And AI-powered analytics can help us focus on areas of specific concern to drive improvement. So if we can take that data that we have about what training people have had, how they've done with it, where they're maybe struggling in their efforts to assist customers, those types of things, and focus the training specifically on that, and use some sophisticated tools to help agents access it and get what they need when they need it. And as I said, that's a little bit more like coaching than training, and I think that's a direction that things are going, and I don't think it's a bad direction at all.
Great, Lori, and I know that you don't have a specific there's a good word, perspective on AI in the training context. But how do you see AI evolving to add value for these kinds of applications, training and related types of applications in the future?
Thanks, Tim. I think we've all seen how Google and Facebook and other advertising tools are increasingly able to not only predict our behavior, but also change our behavior. That same kind of personalization is going to become increasingly available in maybe what you might say ethically more good context, like training, right? So we're going to get better and better, more personalized information. As Roy was talking about, not just knowing what people have been trained in, what they've done with, and where they're struggling, but what is the best training piece of information to send to somebody like you, based on the 1,000 of other people who have similar characteristics to you, predict what's going to be the most helpful. So we're going to see more and more personalization based on more and more information, not just about you, but based on other people who are similar to you. And I think my favorite application of this, it's not in contact centers, is I'm learning to speak various languages with Duolingo, and it's an app that picks out exactly what is the best lesson to give to me based on hundreds of thousands of other people who tried to learn that same language. And that very sophisticated technology, we're going to start to see that in call centers and in many other places.
That's great. And I know this is a topic that could take an entire hour, so we won't go into it in any depth. But I know that AI is underlying some of the gamification training type applications that we're seeing come into the market as well. So we've talked about the various ways the AI can help improve contact center efficiency and productivity. And this actually goes to the question that John Damas asked us. He said, for smaller companies who want to bring AI into the contact center, what are some of the quick wins that can be used to get senior leadership to adopt AI? And given the costs associated, is there best practices for creating an AI roadmap? So if I'm a contact center leader trying to convince the CFO that the initial and significant ongoing investment for AI is good use of our limited resources, Lorian, what do you advise me to focus on? And what should I make sure that I don't talk about, at least in the early days?
I would definitely focus on the problem side of things, as we've talked about earlier, use cases. I would do research to see, who else is being successful in which use cases in contact centers. I would not talk about the algorithms in the inside of a box. This is very much how fast can the car go and what does it feel to sit like in the driver's seat, as opposed to what's necessarily under the hood. I would focus on return on investment. I would focus on value from the absent sense and the net margins that are generatable, as well as improvements in customer experience and brand that can be achieved by the contact center. I would not talk about obscure internal metrics like the ROC of the AUC and other things that your machine learning people might hit you to that are obscure and hard to understand and are basically, the pressure and the carburetor kinds of language. And I know that sounds weird. Who would guess, when selling a car that you would talk about those details? But it's absolutely endemic in the field of AI. I've never been on a project where there wasn't at least one person who tried to pull us down into the technical detail without everybody being clear on the what. Okay, so keep pulling you back to what's the problem. Don't get lost in what I call solutionism or a data fetish and how the problem is solved. Let's make sure we know what problem we're solving to start with.
Yeah, that's great advice. Roy, what do you think? How do I get my AI money? What should I definitely not promise to the CFO?
Always a good question. Well, you get your AI money the same way you get money for pretty much anything, which is to demonstrate or present cases that show how the technology will move the organization forward. What are you exactly going back to what the problem is you're trying to solve? Show how this system will help solve it and what it's going to do financially if you can solve the problem. How does that make you more money, or how does it save you money? How does it provide value to stakeholders? And that includes internal and external as well, just like any other investment. As with any technology, for goodness sake, don't promise the silver bullet Don't say it'll fix everything, which is the hype, right? It's going to work. It can do anything. It's AI. It's going to take over the world. No, it won't. Sell it as augmentation, not replacement. I think that's important, is that it won't replace things that you're using now. It won't replace people that you're using now. But it will augment to a large extent. And don't ignore the fact that this, like anything else, is going to require a lot of work. As Lauren was saying earlier, it's the decisions, it's the preparation, and once you have these things set up, it's the care and feeding. So this is going to be work, and it's not going to solve the world.
What? I was promised flying cars and AI that was going to solve all the problems that we are facing as organizations, businesses, et cetera. I think that you mentioned one word that really stands out to me, and it partially because I spend sort of half my life looking at IT service management and those types of things, and that's establish the value chain, because you're not going to know where to apply this kind of technology, any kind of technology, until you understand where the pain points are, where you can actually add value, and where you're just throwing money potentially at a problem that doesn't exist. Lorian, I know you had something else to add to what you said. Can you? Sorry, I muted myself before I finished that.
Sure. Roy reminded me of one neat trick that I'm starting to get really lost in the internals of the under the hood stuff. Close the hood. Say, let's just imagine this worked perfectly. Okay? Forget about whether it will do that or not. Let's just stipulate it did. How would it change our business? And so that'll shut down all that brain melting stuff about all the algorithms and propagations. Just say how well it would do, and then ask that question, and this goes back to something both Ben and Roy were talking about, in the context of some measurable metric and some measurable outcome, and stay aligned around those two things. As you're implementing your project, don't get lost away from, are we meeting our metrics? Are we meeting our outcomes? Because what's the point of doing this if we don't have some way of measuring whether it's accomplishing its goal? Don't just fall for the, well, it's AI, therefore it's definitely got to be good, right? And I know a lot of organizations go into it sort of loosely saying, oh, we're being innovative, blah, blah, blah. No, don't throw away your business discipline. Hold on to it and a tight eye on measurement of your solution as it's evolving.
If I could just jump in there for a second,
Yep,
Tim,
sure.
and follow on something Lorian brought up. If you can imagine if it worked perfectly, that's a great way to take a lot of this extraneous conversation off the table. So let's say it worked perfectly. But then afterwards, I might follow up with, so what systems do we have in-house here now that have worked perfectly? And let that drizzle through the conversation as well. Say, well, what can we expect? 60%, 80%? What are we going to get? So that might help drive the conversation in constructive direction as well.
Great stuff. Ben, you're out there daily trying to sell a solution and help people improve their business cases internally. How do you help prospective clients make their case? What sort of advice would you give them?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say is you're going to do a better job getting money for AI if you understand the organizational objectives and the organization strategy and how what you're proposing can assist, the C-suite in achieving, the goals that are in front of them. So mapping that down onto, do they have a focus on the company's reputation or customer satisfaction? Do they have a focus on cutting costs and efficiencies? Do they have a focus on rapidly scaling out? Just understanding what's really driving the decision-making process in any organization can really help. And then seeing if you have a story around how you can do that. In terms of the specifics of ROI, well, we need to go without getting under the hood and talking about false positives and false negatives and those sorts of learning specific issues. We do though need to go down to the level of some KPIs like customer satisfaction or net promoter score, cost per ticket, and then some of the supporting metrics around call handle time, first call resolution, mean time to restore. Some of those things they're the daily struggles of contact center managers and service desk managers, is to really move the needle on those so that the higher level objectives can be achieved. And then knowing how AI can actually help with first call resolution, whether that's surfacing the right piece of knowledge, whether it's empowering agents to do things, contact center agents to do things that that can be resolved at first level by surfacing tools and systems administration and things like that. Making sure things are classified correctly so they can be resolved at the right tier. There's all these things that AI can do, but it's got to be in support of those service desk metrics, and in turn in support of the business vision and the business drivers, I guess you'd say. And so the other thing that we haven't really touched on so far is I was talking with a colleague the other day about the employee experience in the contact center. And the contact center is one of those places where it's notoriously hard to find and retain good people. And the attrition rates are really high. I mean, the people that I've talked with, it runs the gamut between losing one person in 18 months to having 120% turnover in the contact center role. And one of the ways in which you can retain people is automating really simple, boring tasks, so they feel like it's not Groundhog Day. They show up, they do another really boring task, but you're giving them more stimulating work and able to provide some sort of career development. And that, at the higher level, is going to reduce your attrition, your turnover in that role, which is going to reduce your training costs, which is going to improve your customer experience because they're dealing with more experienced people. And it's going to reduce the cost per ticket because that turnover has, real costs to the organization, real hard costs. And so that's more like the efficiency use case, which is the kind of a lot of these issues sort of are linked and they sort of go hand in hand. But that can be financial efficiency. It can also be customer experience. And it's understanding what spin to put on it, and also how to know, where the goalposts are. I guess, as you go in as a vendor, what you really want is you want to know, how have I succeeded here? I mean, getting a sale is one thing, but if you're actually wanting to make a sustained positive contribution to a business, knowing, what that looks like, knowing what wild success looks like, and being able to shape your efforts around achieving that wild success for your organization, even if you only get 60% solution, that you're focusing on solving the right problem.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and this is, again, something Lori and I have spoken about. I don't want to steal Lori's thunder on this, but I think that one of the best places to apply AI is through DI, and that's to really apply this amazingly powerful technology to the decisions we make about where to apply the technology. So it looks a little bit like a snake eating its own tail. But I think if you put in things like customer satisfaction, agent satisfaction, all the KPIs, and you start looking about how can we move the needle, as you said, Ben, on those particular issues, that is I think, an early use case for AI that really, really holds up. So I'd like to wrap up with a peek into the future as seen through our three panelists' various and very, very informed perspectives. First of all, what are some of the potentially high-impact use cases for this technology that most people aren't thinking about just yet? And then looking out over the next 18, 24 months, what should our audience be keeping an eye on in terms of what AI might enable or improve in the contact center? I'm going to start with you, Ben, then Roy, and then I'll ask Lorian to have the last word for us before we turn to Q&A. Ben?
Okay, so I have a dog. He's a black Labradoodle called Peppy, a very intelligent dog, and I've been trying to teach him how to fetch my slippers. He usually grabs one slipper and then heads out the door, and then if I don't catch him in time, he tries to bury it. AI can do substantially better than that at predicting what you want and then surfacing the resources to assist you more quickly and more accurately than humans can. Be that classification and assignment of an issue, or be that surfacing knowledge, or be that surfacing diagnostic actions or checklists, questions, and then even pushing data into a CRM or retrieving data from a business rules engine, various third-party integrations. So I think the benefits overall come from looking at what humans are good at and what machines are good at, and I guess triaging the phases of problem resolution. So if you look at, there are methodologies like Kepner, Trego, and there's RPR, and there's all these methodologies for the different phases of problem resolution. If you look at that and you say, well, out of those phases, what is AI really well suited to, and what are humans really well suited to? Something like talking to customers, notwithstanding the advances that have come in that conversational AI, we're still not quite at the stage where people want to talk to a computer versus a human being. So that's an area of a phase of problem resolution of talking to the customer, sort of understanding what the problem is. But once you've understood what the problem is and you've written that down, then an AI tool can really accurately classify that, assign it, prioritize it, start surfacing knowledge, and start surfacing actions that could be completed using one click to resolve the issue. So I think it's really just being awake to those distinctions about what can you do really effectively with an AI tool versus what you really need a human to be doing, and then finding a solution provider who can address the use cases or the task level use cases, and bring it all together and actually have, as we've been talking about, having data available to train the AI and understanding what can you actually do in the context of your organization, your data, your processes, that will enable you to automate some of those steps.
Yeah, great. And I think it's also important to remember that people don't like being fooled, right? So given all the news that we hear about deepfakes and that sort of thing, there's been some research that shows that if you go in and you're talking to a chatbot, you think you're talking to a human, and then you realize it's actually a bot. It tends to annoy people pretty much. Reminds me of something my brother did, which I probably shouldn't talk about, but he got on the phone when he was working for the Department of Education, and we have a bad habit in our family of doing accents, and he somehow got himself into a loop where he was speaking to somebody and basically imitating their accent, and it went on for long enough that he couldn't get out of it. And then when he finally broke down, the guy was understandably furious, and Sean basically had to do a public apology. Oh, I mentioned his name. That was bad. Public apology. And then soon after that, he left the Department of Education. So just one more kind of thing to think about. Roy, what do you see coming down the pike for us here? And what do we need to keep an eye out for?
I think there's a couple of areas that I'm looking at very hard, and I think that there's a lot of progress being made, and I think that they will both be very fruitful for contact centers and for IT service desk also. Analysis of dark data. The concept of dark data amazes me. How much information is stuck away in dark corners in organizations that nobody has ever looked at or will ever look at unless we start applying some technology to it, because it's humanly impossible to listen to millions of hours of recordings, right? Can't happen. If we can apply some good technology to that, and especially as organizations learn to break silos. One of the things that we talk about at the Institute for Digital Transformation, and I talk about in our practice at CB, is that we want people to get out of siloed thinking. There's so many ways that it limits the possibilities. Just as a quick example, I was on a call with a group of people from a particular company. The CEO asked a very interesting question. Really made my ears perk up. He said, what if we could tell our sales department how often customers who contact us mention our competition and whether those mentions have a positive or negative sentiment? That I just went, wow, what an excellent, excellent use for technology. Advanced analytics could really, really help out there. And wouldn't that ability also show the value of the contact center to the rest of the organization, right? So really, really silo busting stuff. And the other technology that I'm watching is, as Ben just mentioned, conversational AI. If that could help remove a lot of the unpleasantness associated with the voice channel, which over half people still prefer voice when you're trying to get something accomplished with a company, but it's just so horrible to do, waiting on hold, listening to stupid music, being told your call is important, all that stuff they go through. If you could eliminate at least some of that, shorten the queues, and answer questions correctly without having to wait all that time, that would be a tremendous advance, I think, in accomplishing the goal that you're really trying to get done at the contact center, which is serving your customers.
Yeah, yesterday in a different webinar, somebody started using the term exquisite service, and I think that that's kind of nice, right? It goes beyond delighting the customer and really talking about just making it as good as it could possibly be. Lorian, I'm going to ask you to have the last word before we turn to our Q&A, and I would say to the audience, please, if you have any questions that we can address today, please go ahead and do it. We've got about 8 minutes left, probably about 3 minutes left after Lorian's done, so if you've got any questions, type them right in right now, and we'll get to them if we can. Lorian.
Well, thank you, Tim. Like Ben, I also have a dog, and I train my dog using an old-fashioned technique called operant conditioning. And the mnemonic for operant conditioning is antecedent, behavior, consequence, ABC. Antecedent, my dog is a sit. Behavior, he sits. Consequence, he gets a cookie. And Ben, in addition to telling us about his dog, he said, once you've understood what the problem is and written that down, an AI can help. And so to me, the 21st century will be characterized by moving AI into that part of the situation, understanding what the problem is and writing it down. Why did I talk about my dog? Because people think the same way my dog does. They think of a context, they think of an action, and they think of a consequence, right? The consequence is the metrics and the outcomes that we've been discussing, the thing that we're going to measure to know if we're successful. The action is the choices that I have, which call center agent to train, which screen pop to give them for coaching. The consequence is, the result, the impact on our metrics. And then that context, which determines, in a different context, you might want to give a different screen pop. So think in terms of antecedent, behavior, consequence, or the antecedent, another word for that is context. This is what decision intelligence is, and it's an entire new discipline of AI that answers the question that Ben just said. It helps you understand the problem and write it down before you start to do AI. And what's really interesting is if you don't start with data and you don't start with AI, and instead you start with a rigorous way of understanding the problem and writing it down, what we realize is AI is part of the answer, data is part of the answer, human knowledge is often part of the answer, and then as Roy said, we have massive amounts of data to help us get from those actions to the right consequences. And I'll finish with a government agency I work with. The vast majority of their knowledge is stored in PDFs, which is not available to machine learning, to natural language processing, all of this knowledge. And this is probably the largest government agency in the world. You can guess who they are at many tens of billions of dollars of funding. And most of their knowledge is stored in PDFs. So in conclusion, the future of AI is in doing that bridge and getting better at understanding and communicating in an agile way between the data scientists and the people who have some action they can take that leads to some outcome. And that's the field of decision intelligence, which is going to define AI for the 21st century. And it is also, Roy is absolutely correct about getting dark data and starting to use it. And it's really strange because now we're doing AI, but we're not starting with data. We're doing AI by starting with the humans who have a problem. And then data is chocolate chips, not chocolate cake. It's one ingredient, but not the whole solution.
That's fantastic. So we have a few more minutes. Our audience seems a little shy today, which maybe we've just baffled them, stunned them all with our brilliance. I'm not sure. Folks in the audience, if you do have questions that occur to you later, go ahead and send those over to me. It's tim.mcelligin@informa.com, and I'll do my very best to get back to you with our panelists' responses to you. Thank you to everyone in the audience who joined us, and a huge thank you to Lorian, to Ben, and to Roy. You guys have done a fantastic job, and I think helped educate folks about the reality of AI in the contact center, and also some of the things that aren't so realistic right now, but may be realistic in the future. As a reminder, you'll receive a follow-up email that will include a link to view the recording of today's presentation. So if you did find this event useful and interesting, please share that with your colleagues. After you leave the event, a short survey is going to pop up in your browser window. We really appreciate it if you take a few seconds to share your feedback. It helps us tailor our programs, not only our webinars, but also the rest of our content to your interests. So to everybody, thank you again, and have a fantastic day.
Thank you, everybody.